My article was about employee discipline, and the article I chose was not specifically related to the hospitality business, but rather the CTA. Because recently, a lot of the employees have been coming in very late and have had excessive amounts of tardies and no-shows. And as a result of that, to discipline the employees, the CTA has elected to fire 107 employees, mostly bus drivers, and instill a zero tolerance policy. The reason for doing this was because they were beginning to get complaints and actually lawsuits from people who were late all the time because the CTA was scrambling to find bus drivers to fill in and for people to substitute this. And it was interesting to hear both perspectives in the article. They did a very good job of being unbiased. They interviewed the CTA managers who said it's a difficult position to be in to instill a zero tolerance policy for absences and unexcused tardies, but also important to keep the company stable and reliable, and that they have to do this. But for some people, specifically Paris Cooper, who has been working as a bus driver for the past 4 years, they think the law is too strict. He was late 4 times the past year because he's a diabetic and he has low blood sugar in the morning. However, because of this new policy and because his peers have perhaps been abusing coming in late, they've had to fire him because he's been absent so much. I thought it was particularly interesting to see how such a big public company would instill something like this. And it is unionized. The union has not been able to repeal this yet, which is also interesting. Maybe, there's not a lot the union can do. If everybody is showing up late, the union can't say that you can't fire them because they're not doing their job. And in the job, the description does talk about being on time and being present. And in the hospitality industry, something like this would never be acceptable. This is why I also thought it was very fascinating, because it's so common that you have no call, no shows, but these people know what they're doing and they don't expect to come back and have a job afterwards. So for an industry like the CTA that is maybe seen as more laid back and more forgiving and understanding to these things, to have to instill such a strict policy is sad almost, that people cannot take the responsibility to show up on time. I sympathize with both sides. I think it's a difficult position to be in if you're running late. It's easy to say, just leave the house earlier, because that's what you get a lot of the time. And I try and leave the house as early as I can so that I am never late. But there are unavoidable things. There are accidents. Your alarm doesn't go off. Something's dead, But if you're excessively doing this every week, I can understand where the CTA needs to crack down and say, I'm sorry you have this problem that came up, but everybody else is also late, so we can't make an exception for you. Let's see. It's an unpopular policy, certainly. And it's also interesting to see how they've handled it because it's such a public corporation. They've been very good about answering media questions, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of repealing that's happening because this only came into effect in September. And I think it'll be interesting to see how long it lasts for. I know last year the CTA had to fire 104 employees due to excessive tardiness and absent, and they went up to 107 this year, which is it's almost kind of alarming that the people we are trusting to drive the buses and the trains can't show up on time. It makes me nervous because I take the bus a lot, and to hear that they're firing so many people and only hiring part-timers, it makes me wonder, as a customer to this company, am I going to get a bus driver that knows what they're doing? Do they know the route? Are they going to show up on time? Because I need that. I need that stability because I can't get to work otherwise, or I can't get to school. And I'm sure that's why they've been trying to crack down. And to make up for firing all of these full-time bus drivers, they've been hiring only part-time, which I also thought was interesting. Do they think maybe that driving a bus full-time is too strenuous? Is that why they're having these problems? Is that why they're only hiring part-time now? There's a lot of questions I have after reading this article, and I wish it had gone into more depth. I got it from the Chicago Tribune, so I do know it's a reliable source, and that it's local, which also was nice for me. I think the most important thing from this article is the takeaway message for all industries, which is If you have a problem that's going to get this big, maybe nip it in the bud first. If they've gotten to the point where they have to instill a zero tolerance policy, you come in late one day, you're fired. How could you have prevented this earlier? Is there some sort of incentive you could have had? You show up these many days in time, you get this bonus at the end of the year. Certainly, I think it's easier to rule with fear rather than to rule in a manner of example. But in a big corporation like this, maybe that's what they need. That's the necessity, is to have to scare the employees a little bit to do their job. And perhaps maybe they need to hire employees that are more motivated. Is it a reflection of their hiring process? Is it a reflection of their job training process? Are they not being clear enough in their statements that you have to be on time? They also didn't say in the article how late they counted as late. So it makes me wonder, are they having a lot of people show up an hour late, or is it like a 5 minutes late sort of thing? Either way, I can understand their pain having to scramble at the last minute to find a bus driver to fill in. I'm sure that's incredibly difficult and frustrating. And for any company, I think, to have employees constantly show up late is a manner of disrespect to the company. Would I, if I were in this position, instill a zero tolerance policy? I think if it had gotten to this point where I have to fire 107 people at the end of the year, I would. I think it's a message to everybody that I'm not going to tolerate laziness, and I'm not going to tolerate disrespect for the job. And I think that's true for any industry. And so that's my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you thought it was as interesting as I did. Have a good evening.